Hello, I'm Brian Mueller, and I'm here with Jim Taylor, and we're two of your practicing presence guides. And today we're going to talk a little bit with you about why we practice presence. Why that's important. And Jim, we've over the last few years of teaching the practice of presence and interacting with people around the book choosing presence, we've kind of learned how important it is to have a foundational practice in our lives, a centering practice that is foundational. And practicing presence is just one of many, but we think it's a really good one. And I wanted you to tell people a little bit more about why you think practicing presence is important.
Mm. Hey, well, thanks, Brian. It's good to be here with you, and hello to anyone that's chosen to listen to this conversation. You know, so Brian, all the ancient traditions have suggested and that we need a first order discipline. Human beings need a first order discipline to bring us into awareness. Uh, the traditions will say, teachers will often say, in a place where we can see and hear. Uh, but they're suggesting seeing and hearing from another location than the usual operating system of our life. Um, and there are teachers that talk about that, the difference between the usual operating system and then this other, uh, more ancient, more indigenous way of operating. So Merton calls one the false self, and the other the true self. And so we need a first order discipline where we can step outside of our usual way of moving through the world and engage the deeper self. And it's a posture. I say a posture where I meet God, where I meet my true self, and frankly, you meet everything else at the same time. And that's what these all the practices are supposed to help us create a momentum where that way of seeing and listening is happening to us as a normative. So the goal was never to get good at the practice and to do the practice over and over just for the sake of the practice. It was always to bring us into the motion, the rhythm of that experience. And it begins to happen to us uh, with really seemingly without our control or even necessarily our conscious assent, even though we had to give it. We had to
Yeah.
give that assent. So,
Yeah, that's helpful. And one of the things that occurred to me as you were saying this is that is it possible to go on a spiritual journey or to do deep spiritual work without finding some sort of centering that brings us into stillness?
okay. So obviously, we as humans created the practice out of this, what Goethe calls a holy longing for this inner interconnection that I'm speaking about between the true self and God. But I don't think we would have created the practice if something wasn't already happening, or if we hadn't had some sort of experience and we said, "Hey, that was pretty good. I'd like to have a little more of that." And and so I never want to put limitations on what is possible from God's side of the equation and from the numinous. It's breaking in on us all the time. I don't have a full. I can talk about why people miss it, but it's still we miss it way more than I think we should. But it's always breaking in. And so those of us who've had that experience, even a momentary uh, awakening where we're brought into the present moment and all the machinations of the small self, the constructed self, the anxious self fall away. And suddenly there's another part of us that's made alive in that moment, and it's the deep self. It's full, lacking nothing, and it's as though it's just always been waiting for us, and there it is. And so the practices are really to cultivate that, uh, making room for the true self or the deep self to have a center stage.
Right.
And it takes some practice. It really does. But the longing is the part that we're honoring.
Mm.
And so I don't know that the practice itself can create the longing, but it can support the longing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to oversimplify, but it does really sound to me like you're saying that you don't need to become still in order to, you know, see with different eyes, become more present, but it helps. It certainly helps the journey.
Well, boy, now
So,
that you say it like that, I'm not sure I could. I would, I love William Blake's poem where poetic line where he says, "Silence is the only part of my day where Satan cannot find me."
right,
And I love that idea. He's talking about the strategic mind, not the guy in the red suit, but stillness is the only point of my day, or silence, where Satan cannot find me. And so he is made uh, a part of his practice to move into stillness, and where the monkey mind is silenced for even for a moment.
right,
And in that space, uh, you manifest a deeper part of yourself, and you're able to have a discourse that you couldn't have when the strategic mind is running full steam, because it's too worried about everything,
right.
and it has too many resentments and too many fears, and it's just small, so it can't outthink itself. So we have to have a discipline, which is what choosing presence is all about, that brings us into the possibility of a larger conversation, a larger discourse, and that that also enlarges who we are in the
Right.
process.
As when we're talking about this, it's making me sort of realize too that you can't. The further I get, I guess, in my own practice of presence and spiritual journey, it's almost seems like you can't have one without the other. It's a day and a night. The stillness creates the ability to be more present, to go deeper, to be in community with other people. Just enhances the overall spiritual journey and the ability to do my work. So yeah, they're very much related. I would also say that, I hear more and more conversations about how we're all so distracted. We're living in sort of
Mhm.
an economy where our an attention economy, I think is the term that I've heard people talk about, where things are trying to get our attention. And it's really hard to get people's attention. And so it does make more and more sense why we would need to find we would need to create some intentional time where we can become still and we can bring our attention really clearly into the present moment. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Well, yeah, and again, this is what I really value about choosing presence. Jim has created this app, which I found,
Yeah,
hilarious when he first told me about that. An app? You made an app? But I get it now. He's not doing anything different than traditions have always done. We used a bell, whether it was church bells or a chime or a singing bowl, to somehow bring ourselves into a moment of awareness, and a posture, call to prayer, a call to worship. And he uses your phone. So there's a chime, hourly, that chimes away, and it's no different than if a church bell rang across the yard,
right,
or as David White says poetically, the call of a blackbird. We can create um, these ways that wake us up, to the
Right.
fact that we fell asleep. And so I think that's really all the disciplines are about is creating a regular way because we apparently need it. It's so easy to fall asleep. I always say I get a good 8 seconds and then I'm doing my taxes. You know? So so I need a practice that's regular, you know. And if it was every 8 seconds, I'm afraid I would just it'd be like pearls before the swine because here's the amazing thing about the human condition. Even when we have the longing, and so we create the practice to support the longing, to move into this deeper posture and conversation that's been waiting for us. If it becomes too regular and too easy, we get too used to it, then all it will do is allow us to think at the same time we're doing the practice.
Right.
And if we think we're doing anything that's good, we're mistaken. We're just Jim calls it thinking and breathing. That's just not gonna do much for you. So so apparently, to answer your question, I think, we just need help, you know, we need to be a little bit thoughtful about how, we invite ourselves regularly to a transforming posture. And it will transform you, but you do have to give yourself to it, and it's not a once and done thing. It's a lifetime, uh, commitment.
Yeah, I like what you said there because as you're talking about the Practicing Presence app, and it is a wonderful tool. It's something that we all have to kind of create our own relationship with. I use it for the morning practices, and then the hourly reminders. They at first seem like a nuisance, and then over time, it almost trains you to kind of just know this is going to happen at the top of the hour. I'm going to get this reminder, and I should do some breathing. But it reminded me of Jim as you were talking is when I went to this big public high school, and there's probably 2,400 students, and every hour the bell would ring telling you to go to the next class.
Yep, yep.
And, if I that wasn't considered a nuisance, not to the students, right? We would almost know when it was gonna happen automatically if we weren't watching the clock already. And then boom, the bell would sound, and that could have been a reminder to breathe, In a lot of ways, that was just a reminder like, boom, you're out of here, you're on to the next class. And of course, we enjoyed that experience of, moving around when we were young. But, yeah, so I think to myself, yeah, these things seem a little it seems a little difficult at first, but no, it's really helpful. And I guess one of the reasons I tell that story too is the last thing I want to touch on is, are you ever too young to practice presence? When does that need to start, or is it just natural that we start from a place of more presence and then we we lose it? We have to come back to it.
I do think that children have an advantage, you know? I don't know when. I doubt it's a chronology, but we quickly develop, the constructed self. It's a nice way to say the same thing about the false self. It's the constructed self, and so that begins in our childhood, and probably right away, we start developing what Bill Plotkin calls childhood strategies for survival, and that's the constructed self. And you need those. It's not the bad self, but it does by its own uh, structure create the possibility for you to fall asleep, to the deeper conversations going on. So it's never too young to start. It's never too old. I would just say that the practice should come from the longing, though.
Right.
The mistake is when we impose a practice on someone who doesn't have the longing. This is not a good idea.
Right.
So part of the work of the great teachers was to stir the longing. It's no different than any other relationship that we have. So if you're gonna say to someone before they ever meet another person, "Hey, we want you to spend 24/7 with this person." and for the rest of your life. Well, I don't even know. Yeah,
Mhm.
well, just do it anyway. It's likely you're setting up someone for failure, but if you find someone and they start spending time together and they fall in love, now they can the practice of being together
Right.
can follow. So I think that part of what we do here is to just remind each other that the longing, this we're honoring the deep longing, and
Mhm.
as long as you have that, the longing is that's the first order right there, and then you honor that, and the practices flow out of your own ability to meet yourself, the deep self, to meet God. And so that's your litmus test.
Right.
You don't give away your inner spiritual authority to some other external authority that says, well, the only way you can do this is read the Bible all day long. No. And it might not work for you at all because it's like reading engages another part of your brain that, you know, likes to know things and control things and study things. But that's not necessarily the part of you that will take you into a posture of forgiveness and deep uh, respect and vulnerability with the world. And the longing will always bring you into that kind of posture.
And as you're talking to, I was just thinking, what I would say to people, it's for me, for somebody like me, early, I would say 10 years or more ago, when I would practice, I would practice meditation, more of a contemplative meditation that were presented through things like Eastern philosophy, the yoga class and stuff like that. Those kind of meditations, mindfulness meditation, I think is the word I'm looking. I would always say, well, how much longer do I have to do this, or when does it automatically become, second nature? And
That's it.
and I'd read somewhere sometime like the average smoker quits 9 times before he or she is finally able to let the habit go. you know
Ah,
and I often think about stuff like that too. Yeah, I did some 12-step work many years ago in Al-Anon, and it was one of these things, like, you don't really get it. It takes repetition, it takes practice.
mhm,
It
mhm,
also takes some deep forgiveness. And I always want to kind of emphasize that for people when you're doing this. If you're holding yourself to an impossible standard, I think
right.
that's actually 12-step language. It's never gonna work for you. But the idea is to just continually show up to the practice, show up to the breathing, show up every morning. Um, and also do, the additional benefit is, if you do have children, or if you do have people that are watching you, they'll have some exposure to it. I often think that my own willingness to maybe even undertake a spiritual journey came because I saw my parents and other adults when I was younger actively trying to do work and things like that. And it made me more receptive and open to doing it. And so that happens internally and even externally, when it comes to the practice of presence and any of the meditation and mindfulness practices. So.